Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good. So, so my name is Simon Peyton-Jones. I've been here in the lab about 10 years, maybe 12 now. Time goes past. This presentation and the one this afternoon are both about kind of generic research skills, how to write a paper, how to give a good talk. This is not the kind of material about which there are any right answers. So I'm going to err on the side of just telling you what I do, and I'm sure, as it were, I'll just advocate my particular direction. But I expect that some of you will have opinions, as well as questions. You may just want to make comments during the talk and say, well, you know, in my setting, things are a bit different. I'm also coming from a particular setting. I'm a programming languages guy. I wrote for programming languages conferences. Some of your research settings may be a bit different. So please, you know, as we go along, just stop me, wave your arms, and we'll have a little conversation. But I promise we will get to the end on time regardless, right? But if it's something of a dialogue, it's a lot more fun for me, and it's probably more fun for you too, right? So try not just to revert into vegetable mode, right? You are the cream of Europe, right? So try to demonstrate this. So, writing a paper. So, everybody has to write papers if they're in research, and it's not just for bad reasons either. Sometimes people think you write papers mainly to get research brownie points and to bolster your CV. But actually, it's a bit more important than that. So yes, you get more brownie points and you bolster your CV, but also you have better ideas, I think, and you get to communicate them to other people. Research papers are the primary means of communicating your ideas to other people. You can go and give talks, and that communicates to an audience of 20 or 30, or if you're lucky, 100. But many more people will read your papers than will ever go to your talk. So it's kind of really important communication medium. And also it's a very important feedback mechanism for just having better ideas, right? By forcing yourself to crystallize what you are working on, you stop yourself doing woolly thinking and start forcing yourself to think precisely. It's amazingly creative, the act of writing papers. So here's what you're not doing: impressing other people, gaining promotion, all that kind of stuff. I think giving talks is a kind of fundamental part of research excellence, not just a kind of add-on for people who want to get promoted. Here's another thing that people sometimes write papers about that I don't think is a good plan, which is more or less to say, here's what I did last summer. Do you remember that essay you had to write at school? You know, what did you do in your summer holidays, right? Some people's research papers read like that, and they pretty much describe some experience that the author has had. But you have to remember that your audience is not primarily interested in you. Fascinating though Stefan's life is, we're not all going to be that interested to read a paper that's primarily about Stefan, right? What else do people sometimes say? Well, they say, you're not interested in me, but you have to be interested in my amazing system. In my case, it would be a GHC. Stefan, you might have built something that you thought other people would be interested in, so that you find the paper is very artifact-focused. It's focused around a particular software construction or hardware construction, and it supposes that the author might be interested in that. Well, they might, but that's not primarily what they're interested in, because they've never seen or heard of your WizWaz system, and they didn't know that they wanted to be interested in until today. Here, though, is something that seems more attractive, right? You might think, in a research paper, you ought to describe something novel, original, new, right? That's kind of conventional for science, and in biology or physics, that really is true. But strangely enough, in computer science, it's not actually true, I think. Just being new, in and of itself, isn't a research result. Why is that? Well, it's because computer science is kind of like a fractal subject. It's like a snowflake. No matter where you get, it sort of ramifies in front of you. It gets bigger in front of you. You can get more and more specialized and describe something that's even more esoteric and specialized to your domain, but it's not of interesting to other people. Anybody can invent new things. The question in computer science is whether they're also useful things. It's different in physics, but if you learn something about quarks that's true, well, that's true, you know, that's a fact about the universe, right? But if you invent something new but not useful, then that's just something that's true about you, right? And that's less interesting to me, all right? So Fred Brooks, the guy who wrote The Mythical Man Month, also wrote this very nice paper. I do suggest you read it. It's a very old paper. It was his It was an award lecture, 1996. You'll easily find it on the web. The computer scientist is Toolsmith. I don't agree with everything he says, but he has some really nice quotes and some really useful ones. Here he says, if we recognize our artifacts as tools, that is, things that help people to get their jobs done, then we will test them by their utility, not simply by their novelty, right? Because every piece of software, in a sense, is new. Does that make sense? It's kind of an important idea because you get to this idea of novelty as being, well, you know, your thesis should contain something novel is very widespread, but not so useful in computer science. Yeah. Well, so this is the whole science engineering thing, right? So this is, I think computer science is a kind of unique blend of science and engineering, right? We judge things by their utility, but there is sort of intellectual beauty and elegance as well, right? And you might judge something by how beautiful it was, or whether it solved something in a more, a known problem in a more interesting way. What was behind your question? What do you think? Science or engineer?
Well, I don't know, but I do mostly systems. So.
Right, so you do have to build things if you're a systems person.
I have to build things, I have to show that they're useful.
Right.
But, I mean, if we only judge things by how useful they are, you don't get Haskell, I think.
Well,
Even though I think today it's really useful, 20 years ago people would say, ooh, we need to.
So it's true that if you were too ruthless about saying, you know, have you got a customer in the biological sciences who's using your functional programming language, 20 years ago the answer would clearly have been no. But nevertheless, the goal of Haskell is the language that I'm involved with. The goal of Haskell is to be useful, right? So ultimately, it's judged by the utility, but the timescale may be long, right? But at every stage, you make an argument that's to do with, you may also make an argument to do with beauty. I'm slightly overstating the case here, but not too much. I think here's another. Fred Brooks is almost poetic in his language here. He says, you know, however, if you're making a sword, you know, however shining the blade, however jeweled the hilt, however perfect the heft, a sword is only tested by cutting. So think about your paper. What cutting can people do with it? Right? Of course, utility might not be, you know, might be, is the idea useful to somebody else in some way? That somebody else might be only a little way downstream. They might be still far away from genuine applications. So once you've got the idea that novelty is not the only payload, of course, it helps to be novel, but just being novel isn't enough. You want some measure of utility. I think the key thing that your paper wants to do is to convey a reusable idea. If you remember nothing else from this talk, this is the one thing. If you write a paper, or if you read a paper, you want to say, what is the reusable idea that this paper conveys? If it's not reusable, if I can't make any use of it, it's not so helpful. Yeah?
Do you think all fields are useful?
Do I think all fields are useful? Oh, no, mutter. That's a question that's too general for me to answer off the hoof.
So, I mean,
right.
some fields of mathematics weren't applicable to
Right.
years ago. But
Right, so mathematics is a particular, yes, it can be particularly esoteric, like category theory, for example. Seems particularly bizarre and esoteric, and yet it's had lots of applications in computer science, right? Like I say, you can't take this too seriously, right? But ultimately, we hope that merely self-indulgent invention of new things, right? I've invented a programming language every week this year, right? Let's say. So I've invented 50 new programming languages this year. That would be novel, right? But it wouldn't be useful. So but category theory is, you know, is and was novel and is ramifying, and who knows what applications we'll find for it yet. So don't take me too seriously, right? But just get the gist. Novelty alone is not enough. I'm not saying novelty is not of interest at all, but novelty alone is, well, it's not enough. Sometimes it's enough if you're a very clever person, but I'm not clever enough to justify my work only through novelty. But conveying an idea, every paper, whether you can, if you persuade all you have to do is persuade your audience that your idea is interesting to them. So it must have some utility to them. The utility might just be, that's really cool. I never thought of doing it that way, right? So, and papers are more durable than artifacts. They're more durable than software. Long after GHC, my compiler for Haskell, is dust, people may, I hope, be reading an occasional paper that I wrote. So, and I think Mozart is my prima facie example of an incredibly durable medium. What could be less durable? You think that just music, it's so ephemeral, and yet hundreds of years after the guy's died, we go to concerts to hear people essentially read his papers, right? evocatively, of course, but nevertheless, I think a fantastic bit of thought transfer from Mozart to us. So that's what you should aspire to, right? And if you don't convey your ideas by writing them down, they are worthless. It's like being a black box, you know, a sealed grey box in which fantastic ideas are generated, but they're not communicated to anybody. You might as well not exist then, right? No matter how fantastic your ideas, you don't communicate them, nobody else is going to benefit. So you're doing a service to the world by writing your papers, right? Conveying those fantastic ideas to the rest of the world. Okay, so enough motivation. How are you going to go about writing a paper? Here is plan A, the one followed by almost everybody to start with. Have an idea, that's good, right? Do lots of research to substantiate the idea, and then write a paper about it. Seems logical, right? It's what you would naturally do as a thorough scientist. This is a terribly, terribly bad way to write a paper. This is what you should do. You should have an idea, you should start writing the paper, and the act of writing the paper forces you to realize that you don't understand the idea yet. So you have to do some research, and then you feed back and you write some more paper, and you feed back like that. Do you get the point? Right? That start writing very early, way before you think you have anything that anybody would actually want to hear. So this business of writing early forces you to not only crystallize what you don't understand, but it also lets you put it in a form that you can communicate it with other people. And I find the act of dialogue with other people is incredibly helpful when writing papers. Okay? So this is a really important slide. If you follow plan A, right, this one, you will find that you spend sort of a year feeling discouraged, and then you get to the writing paper part, and then you will discover, you start to write up, and you think, oh, there are 6 different things that I should have done, right? But I didn't know, but now I've run out of time. So write early. Write very, very early. And furthermore, don't assume that you need a good idea. Oh, sorry, yes?
I have a question. So if I have an idea, and then like I write a paper, and then I do research and find out it's not...
It was a bad idea.
It's not actually working.
Okay.
So like, well, I wrote a paper which is not actually working.
Well, so fine. So you have an idea. You write. So the question is, if I have a paper, write the idea, and it turns out to be a bad idea, what do? Well, if you haven't over-invested in the paper yet, you can just throw it away. But much more common is you have a little idea, you work on the paper, and the idea turns out to be bad in places but good in others. You improve the idea, and then you get into this creative feedback loop. It's very rare, in my experience, to start writing and then you discover the whole idea was bad. But if you're going to do that, how much better to do it at this stage than to do it at this stage, and after a year, you've been working away and you discover it's a bad idea when you write the paper, right? Because you discover you have some woolly thinking in here that you hadn't really crystallized yet. So, yes?
Last question.
Yes.
It's kind of a popular advice to write a paper while doing research, but should I write a self-contained paper after I just got an idea? Should it have conclusion and all stuff?
If I was you, I would just start writing anything, no matter how soon. Don't worry too early about where to publish it, right? Start writing something that might be a paper, perhaps the payload of the paper, the middle section, and then you get into the feedback loop, and then you'll think, you talk to your supervisor, and they'll say, maybe you could get that published, and then you start to focus it more towards a particular destination, right? But I would start, you said it's a good idea to write a paper while you're, before you produce your thesis. Write 6! Keep writing all the time and start early. And if you have to throw 1 or 2 of them away, that's fine too. Does that make sense? That's my advice anyway. But don't overinvest. You don't want to make a highly polished paper that you then throw away. That would be a pity. But you don't need to have a good idea either. You just need to have any idea, right? So the danger is you start to think, I am a mere worm. I have this, the ideas that I have are so simple and nobody would be interested in them, and I go to conferences and these highly intelligent people give fantastic papers with brilliant ideas, and me, my poor little maggot-like situation, I cannot have any good ideas, right? That's very common, right? It's very common, and let me tell you, it's common among people who have, solid tenured research jobs, let alone among research students. So everybody feels that. So the truth is that you should start to write a paper about any idea, no matter how weedy and meaningless and worthless it is, right? If it's a very little idea, it may turn out to be a little paper, and maybe you'd end up not publishing it, just put it on your wiki page and say, here it is, take it or leave it. Or it may turn into something more exciting, and that's very common, to start writing a paper about something you think anybody would have thought of this, and then, like the snowflake, it gets more interesting ahead of you. So after you've been around this 4 or 5 times, you begin to have more trust in this process. But it really does happen. So don't be put off starting to write by thinking that your present state is not interesting enough to other people. Just write anyway. If you don't get it published, so be it. The act of writing is very constructive. Okay, so I've said that. Now, once you've started doing this writing business, you do have to identify what your idea is, and initially it may not be so clear. Right? So you need to figure out what your sharp idea is, and this is part of the feedback process of developing your writing. Right? By the time you've finished, you must know what the idea is. You may not know very clearly what it is to begin with. But when you finished your paper, right, and you are thinking about submitting it somewhere, make sure that it's very, very clear what your contribution is, what your key idea is. And when you're reading a paper, this can also be a good thing to do. When you're reading somebody else's paper, and you do a lot of that, right, read it and think, if I was asked, what is the key idea of this paper, could I tell you? Right? Ask that about each other when you're reading papers. It's kind of good discipline, because you then think, well, actually, I couldn't tell what the key idea of this paper is. It sort of seemed impressive, but what's the key idea? I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. It's too complicated. It's not well enough explained. And don't assume that it's your fault, right? The business of the author of the paper is to convey that idea from their brain into your brain. The paper is the kind of delivery mechanism. It's like a sort of drug delivery thing. So it's supposed to be sugar-coated enough to get it into your brain. If they fail to do that, it's not necessarily your fault. Right? It may be your fault, maybe you're too stupid, but more likely it's that the author didn't try hard enough. Well, it's a mixture. It's always a mixture. Now, let's see. So when I said you've got to finish up by being clear what the idea is, it's a jolly good plan to make clear to your author what you think it is. I've lost count of the number of papers I read in which there is no sentence like this anywhere in the paper. There is nowhere where the paper says, now we're going to give you the payload. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Right? Think about that when you read a paper. Do they say that? Whether or not you understand what is in the ... part is a separate question, right? But have they told you where they think the main payload is? And when you're looking at your own papers, have you told your authors, your readers? Make sense? Because what you want to do is that if your referees who read the paper are going to say, this paper doesn't have any interesting ideas, you want to make sure that they knew what you thought the idea was, right? Rather than they just missed it. It's really annoying if your referees miss the point. Your business as author is to make sure they cannot miss the point, no matter how stupid and time poor they are. Are you with me? Okay. So, here's my sort of plan for what a paper might look like. You state some kind of problem. You motivate the problem by saying it's an interesting problem, it's an unsolved problem, it would have some utility or elegance or something for the reader. So by this time, you're hoping that the reader is thinking, well, that is an interesting problem. I wish I knew how to solve that. And then the paper sort of sketches what the key idea is, and you think, oh, that's clever, I wish I had thought of that. And, ooh, I'm motivated to read more of this paper to figure out how this idea works. So you're trying to hook them on, first of all, that's an interesting problem, I wish I could solve it. And then next of all, you want to say, here's the sort of key plan, right? You think, that's rather clever. Maybe I'll read the rest of this paper. That's your plan. And then in the end, you need to say a bit about how your idea works with other approaches. So the longest part of your paper is going to be this chunk, of course. A bit of related work here. But this lead-in, the first page or two, is really important. So far, so good? Any questions, observations? Yes?
About the term idea, do you mean like my objective of this paper, or do you mean my outcome?
Oh, what is, so the question is, what do I mean by idea? Is it objective or outcome? Actually, I don't mean either of those things. Objective feels more like, here is the problem I'm trying to solve. Outcome is, well, I solved it, and look how good my results are. The idea is, how did I solve it? Right? So, I'm trying to sort a list of numbers. I get really good performance results, and the idea is, quick sort. Kazam, right? So the problem and the outcome wouldn't be enough to make me want to read that paper, because I'd think, Tony Hoare, how did you manage to sort those things so fast, right? I'd want to see the actual payload, the idea, because that's the bit that I might want to take and reuse in my own work. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's what I mean by idea. Yes?
Sir, oftentimes when you write before you start researching, you're inclined to cherry pick research to just corroborate your idea.
Uh-huh.
And rather than, so basically you're trying to prove your initial idea
Uh-huh.
by not...
Oh, I see. So the question is, if you write early, that you might be tempted to cherry-pick research, so as to just pick research from other people that supports your idea, and not research. Well, so I'm not sure that writing early, or starting to write things down early, contributes to that, right? That's just being a thorough scientist, and I hope that your supervisor should help you avoid that, because they should have a broader view of the research literature than you're going to have so far. So I'm not sure that's to do with how early you start writing. It's just it certainly is a pitfall to be wary of, yes. Yeah. But in fact, maybe even starting to write early would be helpful for that. Because you start to write early, you show it to somebody and they say, but Joe Bloggs did that 2 years ago, right? Don't bother do that. And you think, oh, I didn't know that, right? So I often use papers as a way to, draft papers as a way to get other people to help me find relevant related work. Because it's a heck of a big field. There's so much stuff. Any other questions or comments at this stage? Yeah.
What to do if I have no idea?
Aha. Now that is, I'm not sure I can help you there.
The thing is that sometimes you have to write a paper about what you were doing, like this, the essay in school, and your advice is like, don't do this.
So if it's just about, that you're asked to write a paper about things I've done, I would resist writing it, because it's not, I mean, I think me as a reader, I'm not that interested in you. I mean, you're a very nice fellow and all, but I want to learn something from you. I want to learn something from your paper. So I do think you need something to write about, some new creative idea. It just doesn't have to be a very big one, right? But it has to be something that you're excited about too, that you think is a bit cool. You don't have to think it's very cool, you just have to think it's a bit cool, all right? And so I think that's something you have to work with your supervisor on, right? And because I think chances are, oftentimes I have research students who say, I have no ideas. And I say, Max, you've had 3 this week. So that's the business of a supervisor, is to help you to believe in yourself, right? I would be very surprised if you have no ideas, astonished. Right, but that, yeah. I'd be astonished if anybody in this room, was in that position, really. And if you're help your colleagues as well, build them up, your other PhD students. Wow, that was an interesting idea. Why don't you write about it? Yes?
So what if you're in the other situation? Do you have actually lots of ideas that you want to convey?
You have too many ideas. Yeah. Great, write lots of papers. Right? Yeah, yeah. So don't try to wedge them all into one paper. If you say the key idea of this paper is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, bad plan, right? I hate that as a referee. Just write lots.
Maybe in this case there is some meta idea that covers all.
That's right. There might be some sort of, say, I've got one main idea, but 6 illustrations that show how excellent it is.
And that main idea should be actually put in the beginning of it.
That's right, yeah. That's the one you want to convey, yeah. Go.
You say you have a lot of ideas, publish all of them. Does it lead to some least publishable units?
Well. So if you have a lot of ideas, so there's this salami slicing thing, right? That usually means the goal was to get lots of publications. So you took one idea and you chopped it into 10 microscopic sub-ideas and you published them, right? That's not such a great plan. So of course there's a continuum here, right? When do you have 10 ideas and when do you really have one, which are all examples of you have to make a judgment call about that. So I'm not advocating salami slicing. I'm just saying that if you want to write a paper that really there are 2 pretty distinct things, if they go together, fine. If they're a bit separate, just focus on one at a time. It helps your readers know what you're on about. Right? Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that I know that publications and writing articles is very important for a PhD student, but shouldn't it be much more of? Shouldn't there be a much bigger picture wherein this process is supposed to mean you charting out your blueprint for your research, and the goal shouldn't be the number of papers that you write, but more clarity in terms of what you want to do in your work.
Exactly. The goal is not the number of papers you write, right? The goal is clarity. But how do you achieve clarity? The best way I know to achieve clarity is to write. The goal is to achieve clarity. A side effect is that you generate some potentially publishable material. But it's just the side effect. The goal is clarity and communication.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I'm asking you that is because sometimes you are out of balance and you end up going in the direction of having more papers and the research being driven towards having the next paper.
Right. So all I'm saying is, don't do that, right? Your goal is not to get the next paper published. Your goal is to articulate and clarify your idea, which, as a happy outcome, may mean that you get a publication. Now, of course, you know, it's a blurry thing. It's not a black and white thing. Yeah. But that's the goal. That's the goal. I'm just saying that if you say, my goal is to do great research and write a great thesis, never mind about papers, which is kind of a high-minded kind of goal, but I think that's a pity because the act of writing papers is so helpful in generating and clarifying the ideas for your thesis. Okay? That's your... All right. Let's move on. Here's a little sketch of the way I tend to structure papers. So, title. Oh, and this is the number of readers is a sort of guess at how many people may read the thing, and therefore, and if you think about how many people might read something relates to how much you might think about what they read, then this might tell you something, right? So, a lot of people read the title, rather fewer people read the abstract. The introduction. Right, so let's say the introduction is about a page. Quite a lot of people might read that. And after that, readership falls off very sharply. Right? But here's my plan. Introduction, problem, main idea, lots of detailed stuff, related work a bit at the end, and conclusions and further work. And I want to say a little bit about each of these as we go on now. So, for title, title self-explanatory. Try to think of a title that makes you at least, you know, that if you saw only the title, you'd be somehow intrigued. Right? I can't say more than that. It's hard to make titles, right? But no, I'm trying to write titles that would make you want to read the paper. Abstract. Abstracts, people vary about abstracts. Sometimes people write quite long abstracts that really try to summarize the paper. In my field, abstracts are mainly used by program committees to choose which papers they're going to volunteer to review, right? So you don't want to make them too long, because when they're finally published in your paper, the abstracts are taking column inches, and right after the abstract comes the introduction, which just says it all again, right? And that's really tedious. If you wade through somebody's abstract, and then you read the introduction, and practically the same sentences appear, it's kind of annoying. So my suggestion for abstract is keep it short, and here's a little recipe I found useful from Kent Beck. 4 sentences. Say what the problem is, say why it's an interesting problem, that's motivation. Say what your solution achieves. You don't really have time to say, this is more outcomes to answer your question again, right? This is not really presenting the idea. It's just saying, here's what the solution achieves, and here's what would, why the world would be a better place if you did it. Yes?
I just want to know if we can have the slides.
Oh, yes, sure. All of these slides are going to be available. Yes, so you don't need to write any of this down. Actually, they're on my homepage already.
Oh, good.
Just type my name into Google, and you'll find, and then follow the link to research skills.
Google.
Bing! It's just a verb, you know. Sorry. How embarrassing. Yes.
Sir, you went to the previous slide. As a person correcting a paper, when you correct a paper, when you have many papers, where will you focus?
Oh, so as a reviewer, you mean? So as a reviewer, if I'm a member of a program, so the question is, as a reviewer, where would I focus on this, right? The answer is, if I'm a member of a program committee choosing which papers to offer to review, typically you'll see all the papers. You get to bid for which papers you'd like to review. Then you get set some to actually review, right? What will I do? I'll look mainly at the abstract, right? Because I'm just doing this as a quick filter. When I'm asked to review it, I do have to read the whole thing, right? And another question is, though, if I'm flicking through a proceedings, not as a reviewer, right? If I'm just thinking, shall I read this paper? Then I'm probably going to look at the abstract and the introduction, 1 page. By the time I finish 1 page, I'm on to the next paper, unless it's really hooked my interest. So I think it's worth paying a lot of attention to the introduction. Yeah?
I have a question follows from what you just said. Your idea is not in the abstract. It's not in the introduction. It's 2 or 3 pages into the paper.
Wait till we talk about introduction. Ask that question again in 5 minutes' time.
But not in the abstract.
The abstract, so my guidelines for the abstract is keep it very short. Just say, state the problem and what your solution achieves, the outcomes, if you like. But there isn't room to express the idea, except very, very briefly. That would be my suggestion. But the introduction, definitely. We'll get there. Okay, yeah.
So abstracts should be self-contained. They shouldn't have references. How do you include the necessary background to state your idea?
So if you've only got 4 sentences and it's very brief, right, then patently you don't have enough. It's obvious that you're not going to be able to do a scholarly job of the related work and all of that kind of stuff.
I don't mean related work, I mean definitions.
Oh, just to express the idea. Oh, or citations, you mean?
No, I mean definitions.
Oh, definitions. So you can't really, you don't have space to give definitions. I don't know how, this is too, what's the word, subject specific. You just, or I think my only suggestion here is find a way to squeeze it down that still makes sense to somebody, to a potential audience. If you just can't, well then, maybe make it a bit longer.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, it doesn't make sense then to just introduce vocabulary which, I mean, to express your idea in vocabulary that just very few people know, right?
Right, so you have to, so the question is, if the abstract is incomprehensible to most people because it uses very specialized vocabulary.
It should be self-contained.
Yeah.
So the definitions that you use should kind of be there.
That's right. So I don't know. All I can say is I don't think it's a useful plan to say we define, you know, a bifunctorial endomorphism to be blah, blah, blah. And then we show that bifunctorial endomorphisms do this. Because it gets too long. You just have to find some way to express the payload of your paper in a way that's shorter and still intriguing. It's not, in a way, it's not all that important. Don't lose too much sweat over the abstract. Write it last, right? And all you're trying to do is to make sure, actually, it may be a bit incomprehensible. Then you'll select for the program committee members who understand it, right? The ones who don't understand it will say, blimey, what is an endomorphism? Right? I don't want to review this paper, and that's fine, but you don't want them. So that's my suggestion. So abstract, not all that important in my community. Introduction, though, very important, right? So here's what I think an introduction should contain. The introduction, remember, is the bit that some of your readers will read, or you'll get a fair number of readers here, and then they'll stop. So you've got to convey quite a lot in the introduction. Here's what I suggest you say. You introduce your problem, and you state what contributions your paper makes. Now, by contributions, I do mean a kind of summary of the idea. I want to be a bit more concrete about this. So, firstly, you've got to state the problem. So I usually state the problem by giving an example, rather than by doing something very general. It's quite difficult in a short space to convey the full generality of a problem. It's often easier to give a particular concrete example and then to say, and we're going to solve not just this example, but many, many more like it. So here's an example from a paper I wrote a while ago. And you notice it has an actual fragment of program code right there in the first paragraph of the introduction. As a reader, I like this. I think, typewriter font, I know what's going on here, right? I can look at code. So an example to introduce the problem is quite a good plan, I think. But so you're introducing the problem here. Then what about these, wait a minute, sorry. On introducing the problem, it's tempting to give an ambitious introduction. Here is an example of an ambitious introduction. Computer programs have bugs. Bugs are bad things. We will find them, right? Now, why did I write, yawn here? Why is this a boring introduction? It's too general, right? It's motherhood and apple pie. Nobody could possibly disagree with such a thing, but no information has been conveyed from your head to the head of the reader, right? Almost no, one bit of information. The paper is somehow about finding bugs. You know, it's not about hardware design, say, right? But very little information is conveyed by this kind of stuff. So don't do this. You want to be as concrete and specific as you can, right? So I've like molehills, not mountains. Don't describe some giant mountain that you are not going to climb, right? You're going to climb some little peak, a little ridge on the mountain you're going to conquer, not the whole mountain. So describe what that is. That's much more motivating for a reader. It's not as grand, but it's more motivating, right? So here's a little example, right? Consider this program example, right, which has a bug. So you show a program, you say, that's got a subtle bug, right? Here's the bug, right? I'm going to show you how to get rid of bugs like this. Now you've sort of hooked them. They think, I wouldn't know how to find that bug. Do you see the difference? Right? You become concrete. You haven't given the full generality of exactly what kind of bugs you're going to find, but you've given a specific example that shows you very much the kind of thing. So, so that's about, the problem. Now, as far as presenting the contributions go, So this is really important, and some people sometimes say write the introduction at the end. I said write the abstract at the end. This part, I suggest you write at the beginning, right? You want to say somewhere, the contributions of this paper are, and then you write a list of claims, right? So think of this as the specification, and the rest of the paper is the implementation. Does that make sense? So this gives the claims that you are subsequently going to substantiate. And your goal is that the reader's going to think, well, look, if they could actually deliver on these claims, that would be pretty impressive. And they may think, I don't know anything about the subject. If they could deliver on these claims, that would be impressive, and I'm glad they have, but I'm going to read the next paper. Or they may think, oh, actually, those are the kind of claims that I would like to be able to deliver. I wonder how they did this. That's what you want, right? So make the claims. So here's an example from, I don't know whether it was the same paper, but typically in the introductions to my papers, I start off with some text that introduces the problem and gives us some general preamble, and then still on page 1, right? They're not going to turn the page, remember. Try and fit this on the first physical page if you can, unless you're forced by the submission guidelines to use one of those very undense medium. But if you can fit it on one page, so much the better. List of contributions, and I always put contributions in bullets like this. So I want to leave my readers in no doubt about the claims I'm making, right? We explain precisely what the two models are in a common frameworks. And give forward reference, section 4, there it is. The choice evaluation. So do you see what I'm trying to do here? I'm being concrete about the claims. And I'm trying to be very specific, right? So here, we describe the WSWAS system. It's really cool, right? Is that a claim? Is that refutable, right? Is it possible that somebody might read the paper and say, you didn't describe the WSWAS system? Unlikely, because you probably are going to write about the WSWAS system, right? So it's good if claims are refutable. They're sort of crunchy, like celery, not soggy, like a lipstick or something, right? So you want to make your claims crunchy. So here are things that are not refutable and are not interesting to see in an introduction. I don't want to waste my time reading the stuff in the left column. But the stuff in the right column, right, tells me more, is refutable. You may or may not prove this theorem. You may or may not deliver this result. And it tells me, the reader, I want to read it because that's going to tell me whether I want to read the rest of the paper. Do you see the difference between the two columns? Right? This is quite hard to do, actually. But the point I'm wanting to make here is use this as a guideline. Look again and again at your first page and say, does it make refutable claims? Yeah.
Maybe one of the problems here is that we see that the right column is bigger than the left one.
Yes.
So it may be not so easy to write this in a short sentence.
The right column is bigger than the left, and so it's not easy to write very compactly. Too bad, right? So your introduction is going to take a little bit of space in your paper, but you're giving that up in order to tell your readers what the spec is. And there is, going back to your question about ideas, there's a little bit about ideas. You can hardly say what your claims are without saying a little bit about the ideas that you introduce, and this is the place. So usually in my introduction, it's really hard to get it into the first page, even of ACM, two-column, 9-point font stuff. And in a less dense medium, it would take a bit longer.
Well, but sometimes you can actually state the claim without stating the idea. And,
and
this is sort of the case where the reader reads it and it's rather exciting or false. And so it, sort of...
That's fine. So it'd be fine to say, for example, if you say, I found a new way to prove this result, right? You can state the result. And you say, I'll show you in section 4. You haven't really given the idea there about how you did the proof. That's your key contribution. But you've very clearly signposted what the contribution is and where to look for this. That's fine.
And it's good if the results are really surprising.
Yeah. Good introduction is surprising, right? So you want to make your readers think, wow, that's quite an impressive achievement if they can deliver on that. That's ideal if you can. Okay, yeah.
Some time ago, you tell us to write paper before doing research. And on this slide, there is writing, we have built a GeoRef toolkit and we prove it's decidable.
Good.
How can I say
How can you say that until you've done it? Well, that's what you do. So you start writing your paper and say, if I'm successful in the research I'm about to do, I will show this result, right? So of course, there's an iterative process. You're not going to write this list of contributions and leave it frozen until you finish the paper. You're going to say, this is what I think I'm going to be able to do. And it's kind of like a work list for the research you then have to do, right? Because you then say, crumbs, if I'm going to deliver that result, this actually happens. I find myself writing my list of contributions, and then I have to say, but I must have some performance numbers. I must say, this performs better than, well, I wonder what it performs better than. So I think, oh, that's what I should benchmark against. And I write down my claim, right? And now I have to go away and measure it. Oh, dear, it doesn't perform as well, right? So then I better not write too much more of the paper until I've fixed that. So it's kind of like the spec. It's like saying you must write the specification before you do the implementation, right? So it's not going to be fixed, but yes, still write the first draft early as a way to focus your attention, because it focuses your attention on the bits that you haven't done yet. Right? Yeah.
Regarding stating the problem, what if I'm not really solving a problem? Like I invent something which can be cool and it enables stuff to do, like the second light unit. It's not really solving a problem, but it shows something new, what you can do, or SenseCam or things
right,
like that.
Okay, so you're saying, right, so SenseCam didn't really solve a problem that anybody knew they had.
Yeah.
Right, you know, it wasn't that everybody was thinking, well, so, all right, so maybe you have to phrase it as not so much, here's a problem that everybody knows about that I'm going to solve, but here is an area, or maybe you just have to say, here's something that I've done, and here's why it would be, why I think it would be interesting and useful. The payload is you want to persuade your reader on page 1 that what you have done would be interesting and useful to them, or have some utility for them.
So
right?
I don't really have to state the problem always. So
If you're in a situation in which you just had a new idea that nobody's thought of the problem that it solves, I mean, of course, there's a slight danger of solving problems that nobody has. And computer science is full of people with hammers going around looking for nails, right?
because I thought it's quite common in HCI, so things like this.
All right, well, so the high order bit is you want to persuade your reader that they want to read your paper. And if you're solving somebody else's problem, that's good. If you're just saying, here's something interesting, then you just have to persuade them that it's interesting. Yeah, so none of this is a sort of cut and dried, firm recipe. Here's one thing, though, not to do. How many papers have you read where the introduction finishes with a paragraph like this? Yeah. Right? About half, right, of all papers. Do you read this paragraph of the introduction with your heart pounding in your chest, thinking, wow, section 3 is going to tell me? Or do you just skip over it? What do you do? You read it. Okay. You're the only person in the known universe who reads this section. Yes. Good. Good. So it's helpful to have some signposts, but my suggestion would be use your contributions as the signposts, right? So this reference to section 4 here was, instead of saying, in section 4 we do this. So, and this is much more motivating for the reader, much more. Because the point is the delivery stuff, the signpost is incidental, whereas here, the signpost is the point, and that's not much fun.
What do you think, would you say it's the same case for writing a thesis, or?
Oh, the same case for writing a thesis? Actually, I would, yes, actually. Okay. Yeah, so for a thesis, I would write the contributions of this thesis are, and if there's a chapter that doesn't have a forward reference from your list of contributions, you might wonder why, right? It might be a background and related work section, and that would be a, yeah.
I think it's very subjective.
Yeah.
My supervisor insisted I should write.
So I'm just telling you my plan, and you can then go away and fight with your supervisor, and you'll end up with something.
No,
that's right. So
for my master's, so
yeah.
I mean, I think it's
yeah, this is my plan. Sometimes I do finish up, since, you know, related work is not really a contribution. After the contributions, I sometimes say, you know, and in section 8 we discuss related work. You know, we're not completely stupid. We do know about what's going on,
well,
right?
You maybe could just put some technical things into sort of appendix.
Yeah, that's right. You might.
Inside our section.
Yeah, yeah.
Not just valuable, but they are needed.
Right. Okay. So this is good. So we're 3/4 of an hour in, and we got to the end of the introduction, right? And this is exactly right. The introduction is the moment at which you've framed your idea, you've written your specification. This is where most of your readers are going to be. You want to end up paying a lot of attention to your introduction. Okay. Let me just remark that one section you should not have now is related work. it's very typical at this point. You have the introduction, and then you have a section that's a page or 2 or 3 about related work. It feels like the scholarly, scientific, respectable thing to do. But it's a disaster, and here's why. Right, so often what happens is you see stuff like this. We adopt the transaction from Brown, and we give a citation as modified for White, using the 4-phase interpolation algorithm of Green, and so forth. Everything has citations. If I'm a reader who is not already an expert, this is gibberish. I do not have the intellectual scaffolding yet, as a reader, that I will have by the end of your paper. During your paper, you will introduce lots of ideas and just mental furniture that will help me understand this stuff. In section 2, as a reader, I do not have that. So in effect, what happens then is, here's your idea that you're trying to get to, here's your reader, and in between your reader and the idea, there's this sort of wall of related work that they have to sort of fight their way through, and they have to kind of read it just in case part of your idea shows up there. Right? But your goal is to deliver your idea to them as sugar-coated as not. So I want you to have a related work section. I just suggest that you don't place it here. Instead, you want to describe the build-up to your idea, insofar as building up to your idea requires, let's see, a sort of introductory phase. You may say, well, here's the first way that you would think of solving problem X, right? And you say, oh, this was the way that White and Co. did it. By the way, just because you don't want to introduce something and the reader thinks, don't they know that White and Co. did that? But your goal is to say, I'm on the path to developing my idea. To lead you to that idea, I have to introduce various things. As I introduce those things, I will mention to you that other people did stuff that I'm basing on, and I'm going to forward reference for more details to a related work section nearer the end, right? So we're still going to have our related work section nearer the end. Does that make sense? If you were explaining to a colleague on the whiteboard, they came into your office and you said, tell me what you're working on. Would you start on the whiteboard by doing this? Right? You just wouldn't, would you? You wouldn't even dream of it. You would dive straight in with the idea you'd have to give some introductory stuff, right, of course, in order to make them understand, but this would not be your goal. Does that make sense? So it's very important to be scholarly and refer to all the people on whose shoulders you are standing, but just not at this point in your paper. And this is quite unusual. Very often, people do have a big related work section, and I personally think it's a disaster. Yes?
But how do you think our reviewers reacting to that?
So how will your reviewers react? Yeah. Aha. They'll be happy. Well, I think they'll be happy, provided you make sure that in your paper here, right, so near the end, by the time you get to the end of the paper, you have given a scholarly account of how your work fits in, and provided the moment that you mention something in your paper that does directly relate and obviously relate, where a reviewer would think, don't they know about White, right? You put the citation in, not the details, just the citation. Sometimes I put brackets, we review this in more detail in section 8, right? So every point I'm wanting the reviewer to think, they know their stuff. They know their stuff. I'm going to get to the comparison stuff. But it's so much easier to compare what you've done with other people's when you have presented your stuff. Right? So I would believe that reviewers are okay with this plan, right? Provided you just make it clear every time that you're okay. Okay? Right. Enough on related work. So I'm not going to spend any time at all on this part. This is the payload of your paper, right? Setting up the problem, motivating the thing, presenting your idea, and giving details. Right? So I want to just very briefly say, present the idea with examples. So try not to start with very complicated generalities, but instead start with simple examples and intuition, right? So you're conveying the key ideas of your paper initially, intuitively, and subsequently in general. So you want to, if you have conveyed the intuition to your reader, but not the generality, victory. If you have failed to convey the generality and put them off so they never got to the intuition, disaster, right? Best of all is to convey the intuition and the generality. Second thing here, try not to lead the reader through every failed avenue that you did, right? Of course, your path of discovery is important to you, but it's not important to them. Lead them by the hand as quickly as possible to your preferred outcome. Just occasionally, there are failed versions that are so obvious that the reader thinks, but why didn't they, just add the numbers up rather than taking this rather complicated, geometric mean? And you have to say, you might think you could just add them up, but you can't for this reason. But usually, explaining the bad approaches is not so good. You just want to take them to the direct route, the most direct route. What you would do on the whiteboard, it's a good plan. Think about what you would do on a whiteboard with a colleague, okay? Use lots of examples. Start with examples all the time, and then give the generality. Let's see. And then, having got your examples and a bit of generality, now you say, well, here's a couple of examples. A more general way of stating the problem is this. Then you've got to present your idea and the solution. And so you're going to present essentially evidence to support each of your claims. So now you can go back to your contributions and say, for every contribution, have I got stuff in the paper to substantiate that claim and a forward reference to that stuff? Have I got stuff in the paper that isn't substantiating one of the claims? That's a good question to ask too. Okay, when I say evidence, I don't just mean numbers, right? I do also mean comparison, analysis, theorems, case studies, anything that can be used to persuade a reader that your solution is indeed, or that you actually have a solution of a kind to the claims that you make, right? So it's not just evidence that you could measure, it's just stuff that would make somebody believe that you could fulfill those claims. And it will vary from subject to subject. Okay? So that's actually all I wanted to say about this, this middle chunk, because I think in some ways that's the easiest part to write once you know what your contributions are. Just so long as you remember to produce the examples first, that's the high order bit from the content. The rest writes itself. The difficulty is making it really clear. Okay? Right, yeah. Should you assume your reader is familiar with your field? In increasing, so for the introduction, ideally, not very familiar, right? As they get further into the paper, they're going to be more familiar because the less familiar ones will have just decided it's not so interesting to them, right? So it's another judgment call. But you can't assume that they have been following your earlier papers with intense attention, right? So they should be, experts in their field, perhaps. And it's hard to judge. The more deep you get into the paper, the more you can assume. But it's good if you can send the readers away who fall off the bicycle, the ones who fall off after a couple of pages. It's good if they've taken something away with them, right? If you've conveyed some intuition, not just about the problem, but the idea, right? So at every time when somebody falls off the log, they take something valuable with them. That's a good thing. Yes.
It's already well described in some other paper.
Yeah.
Should they re-describe it?
So if you're referring to something that is essential for your paper, right, that if you don't already know that something, or if you don't, like if you're referring to, I don't know, the mean value theorem, right, then, and if it's an essential component of your paper that somebody should understand at least the statement of the mean value theorem, what it means, then if you just say, because the mean value theorem is true that we know the following, then you would be cutting down your readership to people who already understood that. So you probably, if it's understanding the statement of the theorem is important, you probably do want to state it, say a bit about what it means. If it's kind of more incidental, well then it's more judgment calls, isn't it? But anything that, if you don't know this, you will not understand anything further in this paper, you have to say some more.
A lot of papers in this field will have to read the same explanation.
Well, that's right. So you don't want to explain it in too much detail. I don't know how to help you here. You have to think, what kind of paper would I like to read? Right? And you want to just a little bit of detail, but not too and a reference, but not too much. It's different. I don't think I can say anything more useful at this level of generality, if you see what I mean. So it's a tough one, genuinely. I want to say a little bit about related work before we finish. Because we talked about related work earlier, not putting it at the beginning, and I want to make it very clear that I do want to have it at the end. So, and in particular, something about the tone of the related work section. So here is a fallacy that says, often you read related work sections that says, well, Brown and White did it like this, but they were complete idiots, right? And then Jim and so forth did that, but he was wrong too, right? So you kind of say, my work is fantastic because they were all such idiots, right? The truth is otherwise, you are standing on their shoulders, right? So actually, credit is like, it's not like money. If I give you £10, I don't have the £10 anymore. If I had 20, you have 10 and I have 10. But credit is more like love. It's infinitely divisible. I can give you credit and I have no less myself, right? So you can give credit to all the people who've helped you, right? And take the time to say nice things, not just in his paper. You can say in his inspiring paper. That makes him feel good. And it might even be true, right? Because he inspired you. I mean, you don't want to say it. You're not just flattering him here. What did inspire you? You're allowed to just have a little bit of self-expression here to say what previous work you found exciting. So because you are literally standing on their shoulders, and also in comparing your work with other people's, you want to say, well, okay, so we improve on them in this way, but we're maybe not as good in that way. It's quite disarming to referees if you point out the weaknesses in your work rather than them having to do it, right? So if there are weaknesses, and often it's not an apple, it's an apples to oranges comparisons. We're better in some ways, we're not as good as in others. Point it out. And above all, don't imply that other people's ideas are bad because yours are good. But you must give credit to everybody who needs to give credit. This is a killer for a paper. If you simply omit work that's relevant, you will be shot down because it means either that you don't know about it, and that's bad, or you do know about it but aren't mentioning it, and that's worse, right? So there's no excuse for not your supervisor should help you with this, right? But this is a negative thing. The positive thing is that you have benefited from their work and you want to give them the credit. All right, that's it about related work. Last thing's about conclusions, just to say don't have any, right? So by the time I get to conclusions of somebody's paper, I'm sort of worn out, right? I might want to read a little bit about related work, but sometimes they can take a whole page restating everything that was in the paper that I've walked through already. Some people say you should say it in the introduction, say it again in the paper, say it again in the conclusions. I don't think it pays its way. I write very short conclusions. Okay, now, it's 5 to 12, and I promised we would finish at 12, and we will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that you look on the web at the slides for the rest, which are all about the least important thing, which is a sort of process about writing, right? So things like, just little things like start early and collaborate with a lot of people and get your stuff read by other people. Oh, I will just say briefly, this is really important. You want to make sure that the first person who reads your paper is not a referee, right? Give your paper to your friends.
Sorry, I have just a question.
Oh, yeah.
For the former part. So you said that we should acknowledge the weaknesses in the approach.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this to be done in the related work or in the conclusion?
Oh, well, no, typically this shows up in related work because you're saying, well, Bill and his friends did this, and we improve over them in this way, but actually their result, their system was better than ours in this following other way. Do you see what I mean?
Normally when you, or at least I did it before, when I write future work and say, yeah, this will blah blah,
yeah.
Blah blah,
so this is one place where weaknesses or things that need to be fixed show up. You're right to say that in the sort of bit at the end, you might want to briefly say the things you plan to do next, and those might amount to, well, here's the thing we haven't done yet. That's what it amounts to. But don't spend too much time saying what you do next, because you haven't done it yet, so it's not so interesting, right? To a reader. Remember your readers all the time, right? Are they interested in your future plans? Not very. So be brief, yes?
What about discussion part?
Oh, discussion part. So what do you have in mind for a discussion part?
Well, lots of HI people and with the discussion one, you kind of look at your result and take it to a higher level and see what it means for, well,
okay, so a sort of reflection on where have we got to. Yeah. So that's, okay, so in my genre that doesn't show up so much. In yours it does, so by all means, and particularly if your readership will typically expect something like that, right, then for sure, for sure put it in. I don't know whether that, would that fit in with related work? I don't know. So you're a slightly different field, so I'm not sure I can tell you too specifically. But if it's common in your field, and you talk to your supervisor, then go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
One more question. You showed us a slide where it had number of pages per...
Oh, yes.
So, like, well, some pages are way less than that, so this is 15 pages total, and there are pages which require to be 8.
That's right. So think of these as ratios, if you like.
So like ratios.
I don't know. So, and also, these are not hard and fast rules at all, right? Okay. They're just sort of my general plan. But the general plan always changes for each individual paper. You have to, yes, yeah. If you've only got 8 pages, yes.
There was a slide with number of readers for every,
yeah.
for every structure of the
yes.
paper. What about a hypothetical section of figures? You know, sometimes we have a paper and skim just past the figures.
Oh, just to look at the pictures? Uh-huh. Oh, right. So, well, yeah. So sometimes, I suppose people do sometimes try to look at the pictures because they're more accessible. So pictures are certainly good for in writing. I don't know whether I would tend to drive pictures by, are they supporting my text, rather than, is somebody flicking through this going to think, well, that's a sexy picture. Let me stop and read this paper. I'm not sure that's really a good plan. Yeah.
Sometimes if you're doing something very theoretical, then maybe you want to say what people did before, what no one did yet, and what you're doing now in the introduction, right? So it kind of combines related work and introduction, but it's kind of necessary to
right.
what you did actually.
So, like I said, everything I said about the introduction is to do with what is going to make your reader want to read the rest of the paper. If in doing so you need to say a little bit about what's gone before, so be it. But you've got one goal, which is to convey the contributions of your paper. Whatever means it takes to get to that goal, go for it. You just don't mix up the goals. It's amazing how often you get to the end of the introduction and you said, I haven't a clue what this paper is going to contribute, right? Because they've treated the introduction as being a sort of general introduction to the subject, right? That's what I want to avoid. Okay. You guys want lunch because it's 12. Well, I just wanted to mention one thing about getting feedback on your paper, because this is really important. You can go to lunch with this. If you give your paper to lots of people, sequentially, not in parallel, because they're like guinea pigs, right? You give your paper to somebody, ask them to read it. They will never read it again for the first time. The first time is really important. They can't reread it for you again with that same first-time view. So use your readers carefully, and then listen to what they say. So train them not to tell you that word is spelt wrong, that sentence is punctuated badly. Train them to say, I got lost at this page, or in this section. They will be reluctant to do that. Left to themselves, they will tell you about your spelling errors. You will need to brutally train them and bully them into saying, tell me where you got lost. That is what you want to know, all right? And then you can fix it. And you can sometimes write to expert referees. I was talking about your friends. You can also sometimes write to other people in the field whose papers you're citing, saying something like, oh, I liked your paper and I referred to it. I wonder, you might just be interested to check that I've written up your work accurately. People kind of like that. They like to look and see, did he say nice things about me? Then they may tell you something else about the rest of your paper. It's just a trick that sometimes works to get comments from other experts who you wouldn't normally expect to review your paper. Okay, let's see. I think I'll just wrap up at this point and say, go read the stuff on my webpage. Because it's mostly self-explanatory. Thank you very much for interacting so much. My goal is not to get to the end, and I've succeeded in that goal through your efforts. Thank you very much.